Okay, let's talk a little bit about the availability heuristic. The availability heuristic refers to how we tend to estimate the likelihood of an event based on how easily it comes to mind. So if you can think of it really easily, you come to the conclusion that it must be common, or it must be really likely. So what are we talking about? In English, which is more common? Words that have K in the first position, or words that have K in the third position? I'll give you a second to think about it for a second. They actually did an experiment on this question, and I don't know who the poor graduate student was who was assigned to actually count up all the words that start with the letter K in the dictionary and count up all the words that have K in the third position. Today we would just use it, dictionary.com, but back then they actually had to get out the dictionary and count it and establish what the base rate of these different words were, and then compare that to what people say when you ask them this question. And what they find is that people tend to think that it's more common to have words that start with the letter K than it is to have words that have K in the third position, even though in fact K in the third position is much more common. So in the blue bars we have the judgments that the respondents made. Almost 70% of the participants thought that K in the first position would be more common, and a little bit more than 30% thought that K in the third position would be more common. And then we have the base rate of those words in the actual lexicon. And what you find is people tend to overestimate the things that come easily to mind. Now, why would K in the first position come to mind more readily if it isn't that much more common? Well, one theory is that, your mental lexicon, your dictionary of words in your head, is probably organized sort of alphabetically, or at least your search of it is probably alphabetical. So it's easier to think of words that start with the letter K, like kick, kiss, kite, kill. Sorry, I started mixing some words together. Kiss, kick, kill, kite, kilometer, things like that. Actually, there aren't that many words that start with the letter K, by the way. It's harder to think of words that have K in the third position. I know I get stuck in a rhyme. Make, cake, lake, bake, take, fake, Jake. Is that a word? And then I'll go, okay, switch rhymes. Like, bike, trike. Oh wait, that's in the fourth position, right? And you start going that way. And then you get stuck. You can't think of any more. You start making some mistakes. I've had clever students raise the example of irk as an example of a K in the third position. The thing about the K in the third position is it's much more common, but it's harder to find. It's harder to mentally search for them. You can find a few, you get stuck, and you stop being able to count. So the theory is that because it's easy to think of K in the first position words, we come to the erroneous conclusion that it's much more common than it really is. All right. Other thinking errors that contribute to us solving problems incorrectly is overconfidence. I creatively defined it as the tendency to be more confident than correct. I mean, overconfident kind of implies that you're being more confident than you should be. With overconfidence, you think you know the answer, and so you stop searching for alternatives, even though your initial response is incorrect. This is an example of an overconfident cat. I don't think that eagle is scared of the cat. I have a feeling the kitty cat's going to regret this decision. Hopefully the eagle will just take off. But with overconfidence, one implication of being overconfident is that sometimes we think we've answered the question even though we haven't answered it correctly. Like if we go back to, I'm going to annoy you for a second because this little series of events is kind of redundant, but oh, where is what I'm looking for? There it is. One aspect of fixation is that we give up the problem before we ever try a three-dimensional solution, because we figure, well, we're confident, we're overconfident enough to think that we understand how the question's been framed. And so we say, well, no, I can't arrange it into 4 equilateral triangles given the law of physics. I'm going to quit answering. And then we find out what the answer is, and we're like, well, I didn't know we were allowed to suspend gravity for the purposes of this demonstration. Okay, well, I didn't realize that. We were overconfident. We thought we understood how the problem was set up. Belief perseverance is our tendency to hold on to beliefs even when we're facing contrary evidence, even when we have evidence that we're incorrect. That was a very well laid out rational point, but I will still hold on to my emotional opinion based on no facts or evidence. I love these little your e-cards that you can get off the internet because they illustrate a lot of psychological principles for some reason. I have no idea who makes these cards. But the idea is with belief perseverance, even after we've been shown that we're wrong, we'll still stubbornly cling and say, you know, I don't believe you. My husband does this with the evidence that knuckle cracking doesn't hurt your knuckles, that you're not going to cause arthritis. I showed him a bunch of scientific studies when he started nagging my children they're our children, I shouldn't say my children. We share parentage of these children. But when they hit adolescence, they started cracking their knuckles. It was apparently just driving my husband insane. I had no idea he was such an anti-knuckle cracker. And as I'm telling you this, you're probably cracking your knuckles because it just makes people have to crack their knuckles when I start talking about it. He's like, that's going to give them arthritis. You kids need to knock that off. I showed him scientific studies that show that they followed people from adolescence into old age, and there was no higher rate of arthritis among the knuckle crackers versus the non-knuckle crackers. He saw the data and he goes, I don't care. I still think it's bad. I don't think they should be doing it. I go, well, you know, if you don't like the noise, that's a whole other argument. But don't make the argument based on it's going to harm them because the evidence doesn't show that. But he, through belief perseverance, stubbornly clung to what he already believed. It's pretty funny. Now, I used this term a second ago when I went back and got the matchstick problem. Framing refers to how the problem has been presented, how it's been set up. So when they give you 6 matchsticks, the framing implies that you're going to be working in a concrete world that makes sense and that you're going to be using the materials that you were provided to answer the question. You know, using just matchsticks in a world as it currently exists, you cannot solve that matchstick problem the way that they did using a 3-dimensional solution. You either need to be working in a 2-dimensional space and drawing things 3-dimensionally, or you need to have something sticky to make the matchsticks hold together, right? The way the problem was set up implied you had everything you needed and that we were working in 3-dimensional real world, and that leads most people to incorrectly solve the problem. Now here's another example of framing. When we read that condoms are 95% effective, we come to the conclusion they're a pretty decent form of birth control, and they are. When you use them correctly, they're very effective means of preventing pregnancy. But if I point out that by definition that means that condoms are 5% ineffective and really activate in your awareness something like a baby, that framing causes us to focus on the failure rate rather than the other framing. The original framing causes us to focus on the success rates, where it works the way we're intending to use it. The way the problem is set up can get us to focus on one part of the stimulus or another, and only pay attention to those things that we think are relevant. And it can make us overconfidently think that we've solved the problem because we've used the framing that was provided. It causes us to limit the solutions we might generate, because framing gets us to think down a particular path towards the solution, and we think we've solved the problem, or we think we've adequately addressed the problem when we really haven't. All right. Abrupt transition to language. Let's go ahead and set up the structure of language. And I'm going to use English because that presumably is something we all share, or you wouldn't be listening to this lecture. But these issues are present in every language. Phonemes are the speech sounds that are used in a particular language. The human vocal tract is capable of producing about 125 different phonemes. But most languages use somewhere between 50 and maybe 80 phonemes. American English uses about 70 phonemes. British English uses about 63. So American English has added some sounds that are not present in British English, and that's partly because of the mixing of accents that comes from having lots of different people speaking English, not necessarily from a British background. Okay, so phonemes are the speech sounds. Now I can't play this for you because we're on, you know, our little thing. If you Google 21 accents lady, this lady is awesome. She's apparently an acting coach, and she goes through 21 accents in like 3 minutes. It's just, and she's really good at it. So it shows you that you can tune your ear to be able to hear the phonemes that are used in, she's going to speak everything in English, but even in English, people have difficulty replicating the accents that they hear other people speaking with in English. She does a really good job, and hers are like regional dialects is actually what she's doing. You can train your ear to be more or less sensitive to the phonemes that you're exposed to, and you can maintain or lose the ability to generate those phonemes in your own speech. And it has to do with practice and exposure. But you should watch that video if you have 3 minutes free. If you watch this video, if you just Google it, I can't get it to advance because she's there. Let's see if I can make it go away. Go. Okay. I'm going to play her for a second just to make it, make it go away. How do I make her? There we go. Okay, sorry for the stumbling. Okay, so speech sounds are phonemes. Morphemes are the meaning units in the language. So you may have been raised on Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and you know the one shape morphing into another, and so you might have gotten the impression that morph means to change. But morph actually is a morpheme that refers to like the body or the base of something, the basic structure. The word eam actually means unit. So when we look at these two words, you see both of them end in eam. Eam means unit. If you've ever seen a meme, people talk about memes on the internet. Memes are sort of that's actually a bastardization of the actual word, a mix match of what it originally was generated from, and that was actually a mix match of meme is a made-up word to take off on genes. And in the internet world, it means a meme when it's sort of not a virus, but it's been passed around till everybody knows it, right? And so it's kind of a misuse of the root eam. Why am I belaboring roots and stuff? Well, because a morpheme is a meaning unit, and that's exactly what we do with morphemes, is break things down into their parts, their meaning structures. Actually, if we just look at that little box that says morphemes, okay, so we've got morph, we've got eam, we've got s, which means to pluralize, right? And then we have mean, ing, right? So mean, ing means it's happening right now. It's in the process of happening, right? So all of those are morphemes. The word mean is a morpheme. Unit is a morpheme, and then the S means to pluralize it, right? Phonemes refer to each individual speech sound. So the s, p, e, ch, right? Each of those are a speech sound. Some languages in the phoneme area maintain some sounds that we would in English not call speech sounds. We would just call mouth sounds. Like in Spanish, they trill their R's. In English, we don't really trill our R's, so we might use it for the sound of a motorboat engine, or I would always do it to imitate my cat when she is purring. So one of the reasons why I can trill my R's in Spanish is that I maintained that phoneme structure while imitating my cat. Right? So some of the things that we don't impose meaning with, like the purring of a cat, but in Spanish it's or in English we don't use the glottal sound, but in some languages that is included. A lot of Middle Eastern languages have a component to it. In Dobe Ung, they use a sound that in English we would use maybe for the sound of a clock, or maybe the sound of a horse, something like that. It's actually a speech sound, and it means something in dobig ung. That's spelled exclamation point. Dobig ung is spelled exclamation point D U N G. I think it's a U. Yeah. I think I've made my point that sounds that are not meaningful or useful in a word in English are used all over the world for other purposes, for actual, meaning. Okay, so we've got the sounds that make up the language. We've got the meaning that makes up the language, and then we've got the grammar, the structure of the language. It's broken into two parts. Semantics refers to the rules that we use for deriving meaning. So as I'm sitting here talking about things, and you don't have a ton of context, I try and really focus on what's on the screen to add to your understanding, because we have nothing else to share. Like, you can't see what I'm looking at right now, so I need you to we need to both be looking at the screen to derive meaning. Some of the words that I'm saying, if I say it too fast, or I slur my word, or something like that, you don't have a lot of context to help you to derive meaning from what I must have meant. When you have a word that doesn't get uttered correctly, you literally may misunderstand the whole sentence because we don't have any context besides what's on the screen. Now, if I'm just reading something off the screen, that's going to help you to be able to derive meaning too, because you can look at the screen, you can hear what I'm saying, and then it makes more sense. Semantics are those rules that tell us use context to help you figure out what the speaker or the writer means. So if I were to out loud use the word rose, whatever you have the closest association with probably just popped into your mind. But I'll give you alternatives. Like if we were in a classroom and I told you, let's move those chairs out of their rows, that would mean something different than if I said, wow, look how fast that team rows. And we're standing on the water looking out over the rowing team. Or if I said, and then the speaker rose and took the podium. Or if I said, wow, that red rose sure smells sweet, right? These are all viable interpretations for the exact same phonemes, right? It sounds exactly the same when I'm speaking, rose. But from the different contexts of the sentences that I uttered, you were able to figure out which rows I meant, right? And that's what semantics is all about. Syntax refers to the rules that we follow for organizing sentences, for choosing our words and placing them in conjugating them, putting them into the present tense or the past tense or whatever. That's syntax. And syntax is done for most of us completely automatically for our primary language, the one that we learned first. Secondary and subsequent languages, depending on our age when we acquired those languages, can oftentimes be very effortful to impose the syntax on them because we may have to think about it and things. I studied Spanish starting when I was like 14 years old and continued heavily studying Spanish through college. I minored in it. I lived in Southern California. I worked with, a lot of Spanish-speaking busboys and fellow waiters and waitresses and stuff. So I had a lot of use of my language when I was growing up, and I was exposed to a lot of people with, Spanish accents, so that I was able to maintain my phoneme perceptions, all those kinds of things. Went to school as an undergraduate. Part of my time I went in Southern Florida, a lot of Hispanics down there, 2 Spanish speakers down there. And then I did my PhD at the University of New Mexico, where again, a lot of Spanish speakers. So all of that was going great, and I was really maintaining my Spanish really well. And then I moved up here to Washington, and in the Puget Sound area, I haven't had a lot of opportunity to maintain my language. And I've really lost all but like the present tense for my semantic or my syntax rules. I really have so much difficulty trying to remember how to conjugate into the past tense or understand when somebody talks to me about something that's going to happen in the future. The verbs will really blow me away. It's shocking how quickly you can lose it when it's something that is not, if you didn't learn it early enough, it's really easy to lose it without practice. So, all right. With the with this beautiful table, I think it's time to take a little break, and we'll come back in the next segment. We'll talk about the stages that we go through as we're acquiring our primary language.